Well, welcome everyone. I'm Miranda Burnett. I'm the Historical Collections Librarian with the Jefferson Madison Regional Library and the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. And welcome to Unregulated Historical Meanderings, number 13. This is the Fields of Honor edition. So before we get started this evening, there's a few announcements. On May 31st, the students from Sally Duncan's local history class at the Renaissance School will be installing an exhibit at the Historical Society. We opened up our museum collection to the students, and they selected artifacts they found interesting, they researched them, and now they're going to show us what they learned. The students titled the exhibit An Educational Look at Charlottesville, at Childhood in Charlottesville. So be sure to stop by the Historical Society after May 31st. We're located at 200 2nd Street Northeast, but come on by to see the exhibit and learn how education and childhood have changed in the community over the generations. And then on June 14th at 7 p.m., we will be live streaming an update on our Race and Sports Oral History Project. You will hear more fascinating stories from student athletes during the time of desegregation at local high schools. So be on the lookout for the Zoom and Facebook Live links. If you can't make it live, we will upload the video to YouTube after the event. And finally, from July 1st through August 31st, we will display a selection of Francis Brand's first portraits at the Center at Belvedere. Every Monday at 2 p.m. between July 11th and August 1st, we will be holding Sevillepedia cultivation events at the center to encourage community members to learn about the local history represented by these portraits and share that information on our local wiki. And for other programs associated with our partnership with the center, they're in the works as well. So stay tuned for future announcements. Well, I think that's enough with the announcements. How about we make some history? Sterling, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Miranda. Hello, everybody. I'm Sterling Howell of the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society here with Miranda Burnett. And I'd like to welcome you to Unregulated Historical Meanderings, the Fields of Honor edition. This is our 13th unregulated live show in which we invite some person or persons to join us and have a casual conversation about things of interest to all of our history buff friends. Today, in observance of the upcoming Memorial Day, we are proud to welcome Debbie Holloman and Sebastiaan Vonk to tell us about the Fields of Honor Foundation and database. Debbie Holloman is a native of North Carolina, but has lived in Virginia since 1980. She is a graduate of the University of Virginia School of Law and has worked as a career law clerk for the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia for more than 25 years. She is married and has 2 adult children. Debbie is also a volunteer for the Faces of Margraten and the Fields of Honor Foundation. Thank you for joining us, Debbie.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. And Sebastiaan Vonk, who is joining us all the way from the Netherlands. It is 1 a.m. where he is. So thank you very much, Sebastiaan, for postponing your sleep to join us. Sebastiaan is a historian from the Netherlands and chairman of the Fields of Honor Foundation. The foundation honors the service and sacrifice of US World War II service members who have been either buried in or are memorialized as missing at the US war cemeteries in Belgium, France, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. All right, so thank y'all very much for joining us. Sebastiaan, let's start with you. Would you please tell us a little bit about the Fields of Honor Foundation and how you got involved?
Yes, so we are a group of people, mainly from Europe, the Netherlands, Belgium, but also a lot of people from the States, of course, who have, I think, one core belief, and that is that nobody deserves to be forgotten. So what we do through a number of projects is try to find more information in the faces of the American soldiers buried in 6 different American war cemeteries in the countries I just mentioned. So we have some pictures from these places to just give you a sense what we're talking about.
Okay, here we go. I'll have that in just a second.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna start and get ahead. So this one, the first one that we're seeing here is the Ardennes Cemetery in Belgium, which is the final resting place of just over 5,000 Americans. And then the next one that we have is Epinal, which has about the same number of casualties buried. The next one is Henri-Chapelle, also in Belgium. And Henri-Chapelle has about 8,000 soldiers, mainly the Battle of the Bulge. Then we have the Lorraine cemetery in France, which is actually the biggest American cemetery in Europe with over 10,000 burials. Next is Luxembourg. Luxembourg, also a Battle of the Bulge cemetery, but also General Patton is buried here. He was killed in an accident, or he died from wounds that he sustained in an accident after the war, and is buried here along his men as he had wished. And then the last cemetery is the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten, with just over 8,000 burials. And so what our foundation tries to do, we have a group of volunteers, like I said, in Europe, but also in the United States. What we try to do is create a personal memorial page in our Fields of Honor database. And currently we have about 35,000 entries that are put together through historical research, archival research, and just a lot of contact with families in the United States, trying to piece together just a little profile and, you know, put a face to a name. And not just on the internet, but also with our Faces of Margraten program, actually put them next to our graves, to the headstones. And that is in short what we do, and I can speak for many volunteers on a daily basis.
That's a tremendous project, tremendous service. Thank you very much for doing that. How did you get involved in this?
I guess like so many young people, at least young guys, it started for me like reading stories about war. That was the beginning one day in 2006, 2007. And then a group of people came together and sort of got the idea to collect information and make it publicly available. So that started in 2008 and has been going on now for 14 years, actually. And we're still far from being done. So it's really a lifetime project, I would say.
Great. When I was looking over the website, I noticed something called the Adopt a Grave program. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so actually, even before the war had ended, people would start visiting these cemeteries, and either officially or unofficially, Adopt a Grave programs came about. So, you know, these were people back in the day that were so grateful for what these men and women had done that they decided to adopt their graves and visit it with flowers, etc. And as a matter of fact, in some cases, people adopted the grave of a soldier who had been billeted in their own homes during the war, but had later passed. Like the area of Margraten, and especially the city of Maastricht close by, was a rest and recreation area. So a lot of soldiers taking a break, but then, you know, being sent to fight, for example, in the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium and Luxembourg. So, you know, there was a strong bond with people. There was a great sense of, you know, feeling grateful what they had done, and also trying, you know, to do something back for the families, you know, back in the United States who couldn't visit. So you would see that, you know, right after the war, there was this Adopt a Grave program, and that has been in existence ever since World War II. In Margraten, there's currently a waiting list of 1,000 people who want to adopt either a grave or a name on the walls of the missing. But similar programs exist also, for example, for the Ardennes and Henri-Chapelle and the Epinal and Lorraine cemeteries. So it's not something that's specifically or unique to just the Margraten cemetery. It happens at American cemeteries all over Europe. And, you know, it's just a matter of people visiting with flowers, maintaining contacts with family in the United States, exchanging pictures. And I think Debbie can tell more about that, you know, what it means for a relative back in the United States, that someone still, goes visit the grave. Even we're now 77 years after World War II, up until this day.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's such a tremendous thing to learn about. That Europeans are taking care of American graves. Yeah, Debbie, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with the foundation?
Sure. So my uncle was killed in World War II, near the end of the war, my mom's brother. And I grew up knowing that he had been killed in World War II. His portrait hung in our home. And there was also a photograph of the cemetery. And my mother, and I also knew that his grave had been adopted by a woman named Betty Vonk Hobbits. And Betty adopted the grave, my uncle's grave, in 1946 and began writing my mother. And they were in contact from 1946 until Betty passed away in 2006. So 60 years of letters. And in that time, they met twice in the United States. And what I saw, and I knew all this intellectually growing up, but then when we took my mom to Margraten, all of us went, my family, we went in 2002 for the first and only time so far. And it became much more of an emotional story for me. It had been intellectual to begin with, but it became much more emotional once I was there. And it became more real to me. But I knew even growing up how important it was to my mother and my grandmother that his grave had been adopted. That gave them so much peace to know that someone was going there and visiting his grave and taking flowers, and that people cared. And for my family, my mom never thought she would get on an airplane and fly across the ocean. She never thought she would get that chance. And so many of the families in the United States have not had that opportunity to go there. And what's been interesting is a lot of the families, when I contact them, many of them do not know about the adoption program. They don't realize that their relative's grave has been adopted and cared for and visited all these years. And it is, even after all this time, it's part of the healing process for the families here in the United States. I contacted a woman one time whose father was killed when she was a toddler. So she never really knew her father. And when she called me back, she was crying. And she said, I can't believe anybody still cares that I lost my father. So that, just knowing that was part of, helped her heal just a little bit more. So that's how I got involved after we went. As it turned out, a documentary film was made about the adoption of my uncle's grave. His grave was picked just as an example, not because he was a special person to us, of course, but he was just a soldier and he was doing his duty. But his grave and the adoption by Betty was featured in this documentary. And so after that, adopters, got my name and contacted me and said, can you help me find the family in the United States? Some of the, like in my mom's case, in our case, we've been in touch with the adopters since 1946, and that's been an unbroken line. But that's not true in all cases, because sometimes the original adopters have passed away. And sometimes, of course, the family here in the United States, the parents have passed away of these soldiers, the siblings. Sometimes the adopters didn't have the information about who the children were of these, or the grandchildren of these soldiers. So they needed help getting back in touch. So that's how I originally started, was people started contacting me and said, would you help? And I said, sure, I'll see what I can do. So I had to hone my research skills a little bit and became a bit of a stalker, but most of the time it works out great.
Great. Well then, Debbie, would you like to tell us a little bit about PFC Eddie Hart?
So my uncle, my mom, it was my mom's brother. They were very close. They were 18 months apart in age. And I think there's a picture of my mom visiting him when he was he was in basic training down in Fort McClellan, Alabama. So she went down to visit him. And then he came home for Christmas and was home for just a few days, and then was shipped overseas to Europe. So they always had his military picture, and that's the picture of just him in his military uniform, and that hung in our home the entire time I was growing up. And one of my nephews has that portrait now hanging in his house. And so after I learned, I was helping the adopters, but then I learned about the Fields of Honor Foundation and database. And so, of course, I had to check and make sure that they had the pictures, a couple of pictures of my uncle. So those have been added to his page. And then I learned about the FACES program. And so then I wanted to help. I realized that I guess when FACES first started, the foundation had maybe 2,000 or 3,000 photos to begin with. And so I said, well, we got a long way to go. And it truly seemed overwhelming in the beginning. I thought, how can this ever happen? But as Sebastian has said, they got it started, and now we have over 8,500 photographs. So what out of about 10,000. So it's an amazing accomplishment. And there are lots of volunteers like me all around the world and around the United States working on particular states. I focus on North Carolina and Virginia mostly, but I also help if an adopter reaches out to me and there's nobody working on a particular area, then I'll see what I can do and try to help find a photograph.
So what is this page?
So this is my uncle's Fields of Honor page. So all the Fields of Honor pages have a photograph of the soldier's grave, his either cross or Star of David, and then a photograph or two of the soldier. Sometimes we'll submit 2 or 3 photographs, including family photographs as well. So, and they're kind enough to add those. And the folks at the foundation will also, if we let them know that there's some family information that maybe is incorrect, then they will make those corrections. Most of the information has been gathered by their researchers in Europe, who've done an amazing job. But some of the census records are not the most clear documents in the world. So sometimes the family members will say, can we make a correction? And I'll say, sure, just let me know what it is and we'll get it done.
So let me see what I have next. And yeah, can you tell us, Debbie, you first reached out to me back in February, and it was to help find a particular photograph.
Yes.
And
I see that Private Macaulay's dad, I think, has joined us tonight. Yes, I reached out to you all to help me find a photograph of Private Clarence McCauley, because he was one of the Virginians for whom we had no photograph. And you and your staff were super helpful and helped me find an email address for his son. And we contacted his son, and we were fortunate enough that he had this photograph of his father, which he sent to us. So it has been added, and that Private Macaulay was taken prisoner of war during the Battle of the Bulge, and he was a prisoner of war for a couple of months. And that's what the official records that show us.
Well, I'm very glad we could help out with that, and very glad you could get that up there. Sebastian, can you tell us more about the faces of Margraten?
Yeah, so it's a rather simple ID. So it started back in 2014. With ID, we're doing so much work online on the internet, putting face to a name. And we sort of wondered why not do it on the spot, where it most matters. the cemetery. And that's actually how the idea for the faces came about. So what we usually do, unfortunately, we have not been able to do it the previous years because of COVID, but usually every 2 years, we display every face that we have for the Margraten soldiers, either, as you can see here, next to the graves or in front of the walls of the missing. When we launched the program, sort of announced it in 2014, we did not even have 2,000 faces. So in the year after, we were able to find some more. So the first time we had 3,300 faces. And the last time we did it, we had 5,850 faces. So having 8,500 faces right now, a lot of numbers, just shows, how much progress has been made. I don't think anyone expected to have that many faces at this point in time. When we started in 2014, we were hoping, to find more, and we have been increasing each and every single time we did the tribute. But there's so many people working on this, like Debbie, focusing on particular states, or just, going over the list of names every single year again, because, new records are being digitized. Families might appear finally on the internet. I know of someone who has like 600 letters next to her computer that she has been sending out and, been getting back answers. It's sort of, sometimes it's like mind-boggling, just to see how many hours people are spending on this project. It's literally 10,000s of hours that have gone into doing, the basic research to just get some basic facts, and then even more hours to find a picture. Like today, everyone has like hundreds of pictures of himself or herself, but we are just happy to have just one photo of a person, which we can hardly imagine today, that it would be impossible to find a picture of someone in this digital age. But, it's a quest. And, we were talking to Debbie, sometimes it takes a week, it can take months, it can take years to just find one picture. But yeah, it's very special. It has such a different effect on people to, walk at the cemetery and be able to look at a face. Someone, and I think he was absolutely right, said the difference is you're not looking at a headstone, you're looking at a person. So, a field of headstones turns into a field full of people. There's a much different connection that you have with a face than with a name on the stone. It answers so many questions that people have, how old is this person that's buried here? Right now, you can look them in the eyes, and, the picture gives you all the information that you need to know. So, that was an effect that nobody expected, when we're working on this idea, but it has proven to be so extremely powerful. It's not just a tribute. It's also really a moment of reflection for a lot of people visiting there. People are taking the families. You see families, talking with the children. What does it mean? What does war mean? Who's this person? So, in addition to honoring, it's also about having very meaningful conversations at the cemetery.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we see. If part of the connection you can make is there are so many Facebook pages that where the adopters will post pictures when they visit. And of course, it's already started for Memorial Day weekend. And today I was thinking how many adopters I saw who were visiting and taking flowers and posting pictures and taking their children and grandchildren. And they talk about teaching the next generation so that the next generation, understands the price of freedom and what it cost, and to be grateful for it. And it's really something that when I share this with families back here in the United States, oftentimes they'll say, well, we're not doing as good a job at that as they are in Europe. And they're pleased, and, in some cases they're surprised because sometimes they had no idea this was going on. And for me, that's part of what's good about all of this is I want the American families to know that their relative, their dad, their grandfather, their uncle, their brother, that he has not been forgotten, and that they are in fact teaching the next generation to value the sacrifice, which I think is so important. And for my mom, before my mom passed away, and she was the last sibling of my uncle who was buried at Margraten, what gave her the greatest joy was seeing the children being taken to the cemetery and being taught about what sacrifice had been made for their freedom. And it just gave her a lot of hope for the future.
That's great. It sounds like a very powerful experiences to have, powerful experiences to share. Debbie, you sent me a number of pictures of different individual faces. I was wondering if you could share some other stories that you come across.
Sure, I'll be glad to. They're great stories. I think we looked at Private Macaulay's page. This page is a page of PFC Brown, Donovan Brown. He was also from Virginia. African-American soldiers' photographs seem to be a little bit more difficult to find. And I'm not really sure why that is, but it has been a challenge. And so I think in February, which was Black History Month here in the United States, I was fortunate enough to find photographs of 3 of the African-American soldiers from Virginia, and I was thrilled. I reached PFC Brown's grandson and daughter via email, and they sent me these pictures. So this turned out to be a fairly simple search. They're not all quite that simple. And they were very pleased to know that he was being remembered after all these years. Let's see, the same month this soldier, this was a tough search. Warren Hawley was also from Virginia. He was, as you can tell from that photograph, a jockey, and he was a very small guy. His draft registration form showed that he was 5'3" and weighed about 115 pounds. So that photograph is just one of my favorites because it just shows such a spirit about him. And despite his small stature, he went to war for his country and sadly lost his life. And I had a very difficult time finding a family member. One of the family members said, "Oh, there are no photographs. You just need to stop looking." And I found a few more cousins and great nephews to email and contact, and we found a photograph. So we were very fortunate and very pleased to find this and add it to his page. Let's see, I think the next one is, Private Randolph and PFC Randolph. In fact, we have now found a photograph of PFC Randolph. This shows to me how sad and forlorn the fields of honor pages are when there is no photograph. And I always send it to the family when I'm trying to find family members, and so that they know that this is a legitimate request, and so that they can picture what it would be like to have that photograph on the page. And then I always send them the page once the photo is on there, so they can see that as well. So we do now have a photograph of PFC Randolph, which I should have included and failed to, but people can go and see it on his Fields of Honor page. I actually found his 90-year-old cousin, and a librarian helped me find the photograph. The cousin could not find one, but the librarian in Virginia here helped me find the photograph.
We do love our librarians.
Oh, we do, absolutely. This soldier is buried at Henri-Chapelle, Arthur French. And I had a tough time with Arthur as well. Had no luck with finding any descendants of his siblings. He had been married, but he and his wife did not have any children, so there were no descendants. I did track down ultimately the daughter of his wife. His wife remarried later after the war and had a couple of daughters. I was able to track one of them down, and we found this photograph. And the reason we were searching for this photograph in particular was because he's from Chicago, so kind of outside my normal search zone. But one of the adopters asked me if I would help him look for this photograph. And so this soldier's wife's daughter had this photograph, and she sent it to me. And so now they are in contact as well. So those connections are pretty special sometimes. And that's Danny, who is visiting Arthur French's grave. So we sent that on to the family so that they would have that.
Great. What do we have next? Oops. All right, so oh yes, we wanted to look at faces of Cambridge.
Yeah, I do think it is interesting that it looks to me like maybe, I'm not sure, but I think that the folks at Cambridge got the idea from the faces of Margraten. And they've collected about a little over 4,700 photographs now. And that's a picture of some of them. And they were going to start putting those up beside the graves for Memorial Day weekend. So I think this is the first time that maybe not the first time, but I think they were inspired by the faces of Margraten, which is great. Do you know,
Yeah,
Sebastian?
It's actually the second time. So that done it many years ago, just after either the first or second time of the faces. But it's happening at multiple American cemeteries. So Epinal, which we have been talking about, has done it once. And also the World War I cemetery in Paris, Soran, has been doing the faces last year. And has actually also done it, or at least partly, when Vice President Harris was visiting, which was cool for us as a team to see, how it once started as a simple ID, behind our computers, and how it has grown over the years. And also in the Netherlands, you would see in different places now, the faces of whatever town it's called.
Oh, that's great. This is one of the soldiers. So there is an organization, not exactly like the foundation, the Fields of Honor Foundation, but there is an organization that takes care of the graves at Normandy, and that's where this soldier is buried. This soldier's granddaughter actually lives in Charlottesville. So I was able to make contact with her mother and her and some other relatives, and there is a picture now, but there is a similar organization that does some of similar work at Normandy as well.
So this is the document you sent me.
Yeah, those tough 10 that I've been working on that are left here in Virginia from Margraten. And like I said, I'm in touch with some of the families, and they are looking for photographs in some cases. In some cases, I have not been able to locate a family member, but I'm still working on them. And then I went through and did a rough count of the other Fields of Honor, the foundation cemeteries, and came up with a rough idea of how many Virginians I need to find for those cemeteries. So quite the undertaking, but it was quite the undertaking when we started with Margraten as well. So
Yes, so some more work to be done.
yes.
So how can we help?
Do you got a minute? Yeah, so it's what we have seen people just starting with a particular county, just looking up, okay, which soldiers were from this particular county and for which soldiers are they still looking for information. So they would ask librarians again, or historical societies, or veterans organizations like the American Legion. Some are more courageous and adopt a whole state to look at. We have even had people adopting the whole country. But, you know, we're honestly really happy with any information, any piece of information and any photo that we can get. So again, all the names are available on our website on the Fields of Honor database. You can open the page and see, okay, this soldier still has information missing, or a photo is still missing. And, you know, then take it from there, you know, go reach out to local libraries, newspapers, historical societies, American Legion posts, VFWs, open a phone book, try to find relatives. You know, sometimes it's very easy, sometimes it's not, but again, for us, ultimately, the goal is to put a face to every name. And, you know, that's a job that's going to take a long, long time. We're not expecting to be done next year. So any help that we can get along the way is, yeah, much appreciated.
And I think if people share with their friends and neighbors and find out, you know, sometimes you may not know that your neighbor or friend has a relative buried in Europe. And if they do, you know, ask them if they know about this program, if they, you know, people can contact me. My email and phone number is out there, and I don't mind being contacted at any time. And I try to help people find out where their loved one is buried if they don't know, and how that loved one is being remembered, and try and help them with a photograph and the contact if their grave has been adopted, like they have at so many of the cemeteries. I try and help make that contact. So, but there's a lot that people can do, but helping to spread the awareness, I think, is very important.
Absolutely. We're hoping this does a little of that. Our own Shelley Murphy suggests genealogy groups. So check out as many genealogy groups as you can.
Yeah, and actually I saw in a chat, I think Marilyn Campbell was with a genealogy group that has been helping a lot with the African-American soldiers buried and memorialized in Margraten. Like Debbie just said, for some reason, it's very hard to find their photos or information in general. As a matter of fact, to just show how relatively little we know. Like we said, so we have about 85% of all faces right now. If you just look at the group of African-American soldiers particularly, it's now about 25%. So there is a very big gap, and we're closing the gap. Like recently, one after the other, all of a sudden seems to be coming in, but for a long time we knew very little about this specific group. So there's actually a project called Black Liberators in the Netherlands that is specifically focusing on this group of soldiers, also trying to document you know, the stories of Black veterans who have fought in the Netherlands during World War II or served in the Netherlands during World War II. So yeah, and that's one of the groups that we have been working with to just, you know, get as much information as possible, hoping it will provide new leads or pictures. Yeah, like I said, it has, until recently, it was very tough to find information on this group.
Are there any other groups that are particularly difficult?
I think the hardest group is only children. If it's an only child, it is the most difficult, because you don't have, I mean, at this point in time, this many years after the war, most of the siblings of these soldiers have passed on. There are still a few, and we do still find a few siblings, and even occasionally a widow of these soldiers. But for the most part, we're looking at children and nieces and nephews, and then in some cases, great nieces and great nephews. You know, I'm always asking when I send my emails, who has the family photos? No, who has them? There's a box, there's an album somewhere, somebody has it, hopefully. And but I think the only children are the toughest cases in, except, in addition to the African-American soldiers.
So how would you describe what would be your most difficult search that you've had?
My most difficult search has been a soldier who is from Detroit, Michigan. And we still have not found his photograph. He came to the United States as a small child with his mother. His father was Canadian. His parents divorced. His mother, unfortunately, married and divorced 3 more times. So, and he was an only child. He was an only child of his mother. And so he was essentially, I guess, once he left Canada, his father's family moved on and forgot about him. And his mother's family, his mother's life was a little chaotic. And so we've contacted dozens. She had a lot of siblings and they had a lot of descendants. And I've been in touch with probably 25 people. And no one has a photo of this man. And it's just heartbreaking. The adopter was the one that contacted me in the beginning and asked me if I would help. And I said, sure. And we've been searching for him for at least 3 years now, more than 3 years, I think. And we have a picture of his mother. We have a picture of his uncle, after whom he was named. But we still do not have a picture of him. So yeah, the big cities are tough too, because the big cities didn't generally publish photographs of the soldiers that were killed. Whereas in a small town, they would oftentimes publish a photograph of the soldier who was killed when the family got the word that this had happened. So being from a large city and being an only child, that makes the search really difficult. So, but we're still working on it. We've been trying to figure out, again, big city, so very hard to figure out if he went to high school, where he went to high school, if there's a photograph that we can get, out of a yearbook. So we haven't given up yet.
We appreciate that. Debbie, did you want to speak to Ed?
Oh, I would love to speak to Ed. I'm so happy to see Ed here because he was kind enough to share with us the photograph of his father so that could be added to Private Macaulay's Fields of Honor page. So it's great to meet you.
Miranda, have you seen any questions out there? Do you have anything that you'd like to ask?
So there was one question that came in on Facebook that you have already asked them, and that was what was the most complicated search, and how'd you finally find the photograph? But another question that I thought of, I had kind of overheard a little bit at the very beginning. This is before the rest of the audience came to join us, but it sounded like, Sebastian, you were pretty young when you started this project. How old were you when you started this?
Like the predecessor, so the first website was in 2007. So I was 14 back then. Yeah, not knowing, of course, what was about to happen and what else would come after. It didn't start like this. It was just like set up a website and with some. So I'm a grave adopter myself, trying with my best English as a 13-year-old, trying to find more information in the United States about my soldier, Lawrence Francis Shea, from Brooklyn, New York. So I figured if I set up this website with some, tips where to go and how to do it, and that gathered some people who were like, okay, we have a website, we're doing research, but why not make it publicly available? And that was the birth of the Fields of Honor Foundation. And that was for a long time. Well, the database, I must say, for a long time, our only project until this idea popped up in 2014 to do more with it. But again, yeah, you know, if I'm really honest, the faces was a random Sunday morning idea. Not knowing, you know, what it sounded so simple, you know, just put a picture next to a grave, not knowing what would happen. As a matter of fact, everyone was surprised what happened after the gates of the cemetery opened on the first day of the faces. We had no clue. You know, now I can say how it works and the impact that it has, but we didn't know. For us, it was just a very simple tribute, you know, just put a picture there as a tribute, and that was it. And that it has become so big was, you know, for everyone a surprise.
It's very impressive.
Yeah, that is incredible. Think of my own teenager. Like they're not doing anything like that at all. How would you suggest a parent to get their teenager involved in a big project like this?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm not considering my like the ordinary average young man. I don't know, you know, like I said, just taking them to the place. Like I don't think many children or like teenagers would go on their own to a cemetery, but just being there and feeling whatever you feel, and you know, hearing about stories and realizing why these people are there, seeing their faces in case of Margraten, I think that is what you might need to at least spark a little bit going to the place. I think that's, you know, we do so much online nowadays. Someone once suggested to me, why don't you make a database with the photos that you put on display? But we went the other way around, you know, so much happens online, you know, we Zoom all day, we watch YouTube all day, we Facebook all day, that I believe that it's more powerful to set something up offline, you know, again, be at the site and take in the site of 8,000 headstones, walk around, read the names, look at the faces. I think that is an experience you never will be able to create online. So yeah, again, I think really go to the place and soak it in.
Well said, Sebastian. You truly are an unusual young man. It's very nice to meet you.
I also do think, though, that the Fields of Honor pages, the individual pages for the soldiers, because are very helpful when you can't get to the cemetery, because you can look at an individual soldier's page and you can see his picture, and just seeing that picture and reading that list of family members and looking at how old that soldier was when he died, who he left behind, if he left behind just parents and you knew he's an only child, you think about their grief, they've lost their only child, or if he left behind a wife and a child, then you think about that child growing up without a father. And I think even just the information on the page, and I think that the Faces program is wonderful, but I think just the information on the page and the photograph can be very powerful if, you know, you stop and think about it. And I think people can go through, you know, and look up soldiers from their home county. You know, they can do a search on the database and look up the soldiers that are from their home counties and see who's buried there and see, is there a photograph of all of them? And, you know, if not, maybe they know the relatives and maybe they can help us find that photograph. But I do think it's very powerful, all of that information when you look at it. I was looking today at a soldier that I just got his photograph, a soldier from Wisconsin. I was helping an adopter, and I got the photograph today, and I looked at his draft enlistment card, and he enlisted the day after he turned 18. He signed up, and he was in college, but he left college and enlisted, and unfortunately did not survive. But you know, it's pretty powerful. And then, so they sent me a family picture of him standing with his father and his uncles, and it was like all the men in the family. They sent me that picture, and it was very powerful to think about And he, here he is an only child, and, you have to think about what his parents had to deal with that loss. And so I think the information is wonderful. And for each soldier to have a page, I think is very special. And the amount of work that's gone into those, how many, 35,000 pages? I mean, it's a lot of pages.
Yeah, and now you're saying this, I'm also thinking sometimes we do get emails from like a high school student who have a class assignment to, pick a particular soldier and do research. So they kind of take ownership of that story. And that's also, I think, very helpful for kind of emotional involvement, if you go research that story yourself from the beginning till the end. When you go to the cemetery and when you do tour, they would say to school groups, at the end, walk around and touch one headstone, read the name, remember it, remember the connection that you feel at that moment when you touch the stone, take it home with you and look him up. Then you're not talking about the war in general, just talking about one person that you're connecting with. And I think that's also a very powerful way. It's just one story, but it might do more than, just talking in class about the whole history of World War II for a few hours. Yeah.
Anything else out there, Miranda?
Say that is all the questions I've seen. Let's see. Oh, another suggestion, any of the servicemen that served with him, do they have any of the family have pictures to share with any that are not identified?
Yeah,
I feel like I said that wrong. But
no, I know what you mean. So my
You
uncle was in the 83rd, was in the 83rd Division, and the soldier for whom we've been searching from Detroit was in the 83rd Division. So, and there is an 83rd Division, there are a couple of Facebook pages and a website, and a lot of involved people, including some people from Belgium who are very involved with helping preserve the history of the 83rd Division. And so every time somebody new pops up in those groups, I will check them out and see if they were with the same unit as this soldier. And I'll ask them if they have any pictures, if they have any pictures with this name. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I even was able to track down, so he had a friend that he worked with. So when he did his enlistment, he did not list his mother as his next of kin. He listed this friend of his. And so I was able to track down the friend's daughter. But I thought maybe, she would have a picture of her dad with this soldier, but unfortunately she did not. But yeah, all good ideas. And sometimes I'll contact churches, the church where the soldier may be memorialized here in the United States in the home church cemetery, even though he's buried in Europe. So I'll contact the church and ask them if they can help me locate the family. And that has worked in sometimes as well.
And there's one more question that just popped up. Do you stay in touch with families you have found photos from?
I do stay in touch with some of them. Some of them I become Facebook friends with. I always tell them, about the Facebook groups, and of course, none of that's mandatory. They don't have to do it, and they don't have to be in touch with the adoptive family. It's all voluntary, but I do tell them about it. And so some of the folks I have become Facebook friends with, both the adopter and the family here in the United States. And what I do get great joy in seeing those two, the family here and the adopters, communicate. They'll post pictures and they'll communicate back and forth. And it's very rewarding to see that, because it makes everybody feel that connection and understand, that everybody is realizing the sacrifice and is honoring the sacrifice and is remembering these heroes. And that's what I want the families in the United States to know, that their heroes, their relatives, their dads and grandfathers and uncles are being remembered every day. And I guess that's probably the most important thing for me, because that was the most important thing for my mom and my grandmother, to know that my uncle was not forgotten, that he was being visited and that he was not being forgotten.
Absolutely.
So that is all for the questions I've seen.
Okay,
I suppose I
well-
will turn it back over to you, Sterling.
Yeah, we're about 4 minutes to the top of the hour, so we've done well, and I think we need to let Sebastian get some sleep. He's got lots of work to do out there. So I guess that's about enough meandering for one day. But before we go, we invite you again, as always, to leave any suggestions you have about any future shows, future guests, subjects we cover. Just drop it in the comments before you leave, or you can email me at programs@albemarlehistory.org. Don't forget to come by the Historical Society and check out the Educational Look at Childhood in Charlottesville exhibit, courtesy of a local history class taught by Sally Duncan at the Renaissance School. The exhibit should be ready for viewing early June. Our next virtual program will be on June 14th at 7 p.m. when we'll hear from more participants in our Race and Sports Oral History Project. You can visit the Center at Belvedere between July 1st and August 31st to view a curated selection of Francis Brand's first portraits. And remember, please, that everything we do as your historical society is because of your support. To support your historical society, you can visit our website to become a member, or you can call us at 434-296-1492. Unregulated Historical Meanderings is brought to you by the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society and our wonderful supporters like yourselves. Thanks again to Debbie and Sebastian for Zooming with us today. Thanks, Sebastian, for staying up so late. Thanks to the Fields of Honor Foundation for the tremendously meaningful work. Deepest appreciation to all those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation and for our allies, and to the families they left behind. And thanks to everyone out there for joining us tonight, including you, Miranda. Always appreciate our librarians. I'm Sterling Howell here with Miranda Burnett, and we hope to see you on our next Unregulated Historical Meanderings. Until then, meander on. Thank you all. Have a great night.